episode of the Grassy Knoll. And with us today is Joan Veon. And Joan, many of you are familiar with her. She's been on the show before. But by way of giving her a slight introduction, which does her no credit really, Joan is a financial advisor. She began by Veon Financial Services Incorporated, still runs that, as well as the Women's International Media Group. She's run a ton of articles and also 2 books of note, and that is Prince Charles, The Sustainable Prince, and the United Nations Global Straight Jacket. And there's a special offer on them that we'll talk about a little bit later. She also has a website, and that is www.womensgroup.org. And she's some kind of person, never runs out of energy. Did 2 hours late night with Dr. Stanley Monteith. And I didn't think he went to bed that late, Joan.
Well, occasionally I rise to the occasion.
And so does Stanley. He's another one that never stops. One of the things, actually, the core of what I wanted to talk to you about, and I don't know how often you do this, and that is what's been, it's an issue that's both fascinating and also very, very, I think, nefarious, and that is just how disaggregated, if you will, is the British Empire.
Oh, yes. A subject near and deep to my heart. It's very interesting. When I was growing up, and this is the story of my life, and it's amazing how God just weaves things in your life together. I was, I think, 12 years old, and I had gotten my first library card. And I went to the library in my hometown of Racine, Wisconsin. And I looked around, and it was pretty big and pretty daunting. And so I said to the librarian, I held up my little library card and said, I just got my library card, and it's so big in here, and I don't know where to read. Where should I begin? And she said, follow me. And she took me to a corner of the library. She pulled a book off the shelf and said, begin with this book. And when you're done with this book, read everything on this shelf, and then when you're done with this shelf, everything on this shelf. The shelf below. And I did. And throughout my teenage years, I became a lover of the British royal family. That first book was called Young Bess. And it was a story about the early years of Elizabeth I. And not too long ago, in an antique bookstore, I was able to find a copy of it. So I became a lover of the British royal family. And the kings, the queens, whatever they were, princesses, knights in shining armor, that whole fairy tale is what I bit off. And it wasn't until I had graduated from college, my husband took me to Europe as a birthday gift, and we were in Austria, I believe. And part of our tour, there were a lot of different people from different countries, and there was this British man with his son, and they were touring as well. And so I said, oh, you're from Britain. I said, I just love the Queen. I just love the royal family. And he looked at me and he said, do you know who they are? I said, no. He said, do you know where they get their wealth? I said, no. And he said, they sell opium. That's how they get their wealth. He said, if I were you, I wouldn't be in love with them. Well, I thought he was crazy. I thought he was nuts. And it took a number of years until I started understanding that there's a little bit more to the people that are looked upon by many people as just being royal. Now, when I first covered my first United Nations conference in 1994, I was starting to become acquainted with a very Orwellian, pagan, evil agenda called sustainable development. Now, I didn't know a thing about the United Nations in 1994. I didn't know a thing about sustainable development. And as I started reading, I was amazed at what the United Nations was putting forth for the people of the world to believe. And it's really an anti-Christ, anti-God agenda. It is a perversion, an inversion of Genesis 1. Mm-hmm. And I happened, by God's grace, to find a speech given by Prince Charles commending the commission, the United Nations Commission, that studied and came up with the term sustainable development. And he wrote, he was speaking to them in 1989 and commending them for their work on sustainable development. And my first response was, what? The Prince of Wales is involved with this? Mm-hmm. And about a year later, I was at the World Bank for a series of meetings that they were having and workshops. And coming out of one of the workshops, you know, I just didn't know where to go because there were so many places that I could be. And did I choose the wrong place? Yes and no. Because coming out of the workshop that I attended was the workshop that probably I should have gone to, but there was a navy blue document. And as I was passing this table, not that I even thought of picking it up, the navy blue caught the peripheral of my eye. And I stopped and I looked, and there it was. There was the find of the century. The Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum in partnership with the World Bank and the United Nations. And I'm like, what? The Prince is involved? And that began my research into Prince Charles and his activities. My first book is called Prince Charles, the Sustainable Prince. Even though I wrote that book 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, the bottom line is that book is as relevant today as it was when I wrote it. I was just ahead of my time by 6, 7, 8 years. Mm-hmm. It is as relevant today. I just returned from the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. And there, after 10 years of studying world government, including sustainable development, Prince Charles and his organization, the Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum, global taxation, and public-private partnership, all of those issues came to an apex at this meeting in Davos. Now, this was my 65th global meeting. So everything that I wrote in Prince Charles is as relevant today, is as important today for us to understand who rules and who runs the world. Well, when I wrote Prince Charles, after doing a fair amount of research on the prince, I realized in looking at all of his biographies that there is a complete blackout of all of his activities on the international level having to do with the United Nations, the World Bank, the Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum, and public-private partnership. There's a complete blackout. You won't read anything in any of them except one of his biographies, and one of the books on him has one sentence mentioning the Prince of Wales International Business Leaders Forum. So he is a very major mover and shaker. In addition, I have had the opportunity to interview Maurice Strong six or seven times. And on several occasions, I have interviewed him and talked to him about Prince Charles and his activities on the international level. So I'm not like making this up, and I'm not imagining it. I can document everything I see. Mm-hmm. Now, having studied the role of the British royal family, I concluded when I ended up writing my book, Prince Charles, that the power and the agenda behind the United Nations was the British royal family. And furthermore, I determined that when America signed the United Nations Charter is when we reverted back under British rule. Since that time, I've had different people bring to me different information that leads me also to believe that it's a big possibility that we never left. We just assumed a different position with the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. However, I have recently written a newsletter through the women's group called UN Watch, and it has to do with the British Commonwealth, which is now called the Commonwealth of Nations. And it's very interesting. as I have covered all the various meetings that I have, whether those meetings have been in Johannesburg, South Africa, or whether they have been in New York, or whether they have been in Rome, or whether they have been wherever I have gone, that there is always somebody from the Prince of Wales Business Leaders Forum at these meetings, number one. Number two, that the Commonwealth kept surfacing. So I remember, where was I? I was in Mexico at a meeting, and the Commonwealth decided to have a workshop. So I went to it. And, I was a reporter, and I had my tape recorder out, and they're all looking at me cross-eyed. And I said, well, I'm Joan Veon with USA Radio, and the moderator said, why are you here? And I said, well, I saw it advertised, and I don't know anything about the Commonwealth, and I just thought I'd come and see who you are. And they didn't know how to ask me to leave, because if they asked me to leave, then I would have known that there's something more clandestine. And it was very interesting to find and to see that the global objective of the Commonwealth was the same as the United Nations. Mm-hmm. I didn't really start thinking anything specifically about that until I went to the WTO meeting in Cancun in 2002. And there, 3 African nations did a press briefing in which they cried and said their people were starving and they would die if rich countries like America and Europe did not open up their markets for their agricultural products. And so I thought, wait a minute, these countries all have gold, and one of them has diamonds, and so why are they still starving? So my question to them in the press briefing was, excuse me, you have diamonds, you have gold, and can you tell me why you're starving, or if your loans to the World Bank are still eating up 95% of what you're getting from your natural resources? No comment. None of them would comment. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So after the press briefing, I was able to speak to each one of them, and my questions to each one of them and their responses were all the same. The questions were, you're a member of the Commonwealth, right? Yes. Well, why can't you go to Britain for help if you're having that much trouble? Oh, well, we can't. Oh, well then, why don't you withdraw from the Commonwealth? Oh, we can't do that either. What? You can't withdraw from the Commonwealth? No. Oh, that's very interesting. So I came home and I was a little puzzled. Okay, these guys, none of them can withdraw from the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is supposed to be a free association of former colonies of the British Empire. And then, you have the Commonwealth, and they're all over the UN system. And at the annual meetings, the Commonwealth, since it has consultative status at the UN, they give their comments just like the Knights of Malta and all sorts of other groups at the UN. And I thought, hey, there's something going on here. So I called the British Information Society and I said, tell me, every time you decolonized a country, did they get a vote at the United Nations? Oh, well, I don't know. I'm going to have to check that out. She calls me back. She says, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Every time we decolonized a country, they received a vote at the United Nations. Ah, bingo. There's something else going on here. This is the bottom line. There are 54 countries that are members of the Commonwealth. As such, they operate and are members of the United Nations, as well as all of the other international level. And therefore, that means that if they're a member of the Commonwealth, then I would assume that they are required also to vote like the Commonwealth votes, which means in the United Nations, the Commonwealth has 54 votes. Right. America has 1. And you can go to any of the international organizations, the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade, The bottom line is America is outvoted in every single one of the international organizations throughout the world. If you take a look at the Group of Eight, the Group of Eight are supposedly the top industrialized countries of the world, but we're really going to leave Russia out, so it's the G7 that are really the industrialized countries of the world. As such, two of them are British members of the British Commonwealth, Britain and Canada. So even in the Group of Eight, we are outvoted 2-1.
Right.
And then when you look at, like, for example, the free trade areas of the Americas, there are 13 members of the Commonwealth in this hemisphere. We are outvoted 13-1.
Joan, let me stop you there for a second, though. Now, just to make it clear, because I've had the benefit of reading the UN Watch, in which you delineate all that you're talking about here. But people might say, well, so what? There's 54 votes out there. What has that got to do with Great Britain? But you're saying when they, at least on paper, decolonize, that particular nation's vote is pretty much the UK's, is it not?
Yes.
All right, so they are actually, the UK is actually exercising the power of 54 votes.
That is correct. You see, when you take a look at every country, what they did in the United Nations is they set it up. The rules are every country gets one vote.
Right.
They didn't set it up by according to gross national product. They didn't set it up by size of country. They didn't set it up by population of country. They just said one country, one vote. Because I would imagine, depending on how they could have set it up, America would have had a whole lot more votes. And so Britain automatically, just by the way it was set up, because Canada had a vote at the UN from the beginning. They just what Britain has been doing, from what I can see, is why. Pray tell, listen. You have certain assets, right? And those assets have a lot of resources. Why in the world would you spin them off? Okay, you wouldn't. And so when you take a look at, for example, South Africa has, as well as many of the other countries in Africa that have gold. They have gold, they have diamonds, they have copper, they have other natural resources. The point is, why would you spin off countries with all these assets and say, okay, now you're your own country, bye-bye? You really wouldn't.
Right.
The decolonization was just a gimmick for a vote.
Right.
Same way you can look at Russia. All right, so they spun off all their countries. What? How many? 13. And the bottom line is they all got a vote at the UN. America has one. I mean, you look at the European Union. The European Union is supposed to compete with the United States. As such, the European Union has 25 votes. Those countries did not lose their UN vote when they became part of the European Union.
Right.
Yet America doesn't have a vote for every single one of our states.
Right. So then, when we see the supposed collapse of both the British Empire and also recently the Soviet Union, all they did was skillfully, on paper, downsize, but actually increase their clout in the United Nations Forum.
Absolutely.
If we could, I just want to let people know we're speaking with Joan Veon. This is the Grassy Knoll on Dade City Micro Radio. And Joan, you would ask me why I use the name Vyzygoth. It comes from the days when we were pirate radio, and we didn't want anybody knowing who we were. And then we just kept it with us as we got legit. And now we're kind of like not legit again. But at any rate, that was the story behind that. Before we go any further, though, too, how can people find out more about those newsletters? Because they were excellent, especially that one financial newsletter you had called that 70s Economy.
Yes.
They're great. How can people get a hold of them?
They can buy an individual issue. The economic newsletter is $10 per issue. It comes out quarterly. And the return to the economic newsletter entitled "Does a Return to the 70s Equal the Death of the Dollar?" That's $11. They can call 301-371-0541 and request a single copy, or if they'd like, they can subscribe. The economic newsletter is $44 a year, and they can subscribe using Visa or MasterCard, or they can write a check. With regard to UN Watch, that newsletter comes out bi-monthly. It's $45 a year. And I know you say, well, hey, I'm trying to make these reasonable in price, but I have to tell you it takes a tremendous amount of time for me to put together the research and the understanding and the knowledge that I have. But anyway, a yearly subscription to UN Watch is $45, or they can call and ask for $7, a individual copy of that particular newsletter on the Commonwealth. That number again, 301-371-0541. And let me also say that the ability for people to buy my material and my research allows me to go to these meetings. I mean, this is a very, very expensive endeavor, and it really requires a lot of help. And I would just ask them to very seriously consider getting this information, because they can then freely publish that newsletter and help other people understand and read truth and information that they're not going to get anywhere else in the United States.
And with your two books also, do you have presently a 2-for-1 running?
I do have a 2-for-1. I do need to stop it, but I still have it. So, hey, you better get in on the 2-for-1. 2 Prince Charles for $23.50, or 2 United Nations Global Straitjackets for $23.50. Now, each of those books are over 400 pages, and Prince Charles, which is over 200 pages, 2-for-1 for $14. And again, they can call 301-371-0541.
Well, the newsletter, the UN Watch newsletter that really got me actuated to get in touch with you was entitled "The Power of the British Commonwealth Over the World."
Mm-hmm.
And we talked yesterday about some of the things that's been rolling through my head as far as, I asked this question once almost kiddingly, and then I started to think about it, and I said, what would happen if the United States really, in fact, didn't ever get free of the crown? And now, as it's been like a couple of years, I find more and more reason to think that perhaps we haven't.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to what you were talking about the nations whose votes belong to what we've called them UK, we've called them Britain, we call them the Crown. They're financially in straits to the IMF. Is there an involvement with the Crown and the IMF?
Yeah, there is some. I don't have all the details. I had somebody on another radio show send me a whole chronology, if you will, of the actual pages from our laws. And he wrote a little note, and I have to get back to him because he said our tax dollars go to the Federal Reserve. From the Federal Reserve, they go to the IMF, and from the IMF, they go back to the Bank of England. And so I haven't had a chance to study it, but I can tell you that the IMF World Bank was set up by John Maynard Keynes, mm-hmm. a British socialist, and he was the economic expert that Roosevelt relied on to help us get out of the Depression. And so we still have Keynesian economics with us. So let's take a look at an agenda here. This also goes back to my newsletters on the 70s, the dollar, and going back to the dollar and the value of the 70s. The bottom line is, when you take a look at the dire straits of the whole entire world, it's predicated on Keynesian economics. And he was British. And he basically said, well, what a country has to do is they have to deficit spend to get out of the Depression. So here we are from 1933, we're looking at 72 years later. And the bottom line is every level of government in America is broke. And you can go all around the world, and they're all broke. And so what do we have now? We have a complete fiat currency and a fiat banking system that is basically run by the central banks. And if you go back to the central banks, the Bank of England was started in 1894 by William Patterson, who was a businessman, and he was a very questionable man by way of reputation. And he decided that Britain should copy the idea of the Swedes, and that is to start a private corporation that would lend to the government monies in which they would receive forever, in perpetuity, interest. And so the Bank of England was birthed, and King William and Queen Mary were the two of the largest stock owners of this private corporation. And it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to understand that if they also contributed to the Bank of England, that as the other countries around the world also set up central banks because they were also being taken over economically, that I am sure the British are right there, because this would be an awesome opportunity of a lifetime. And like the Rothschilds and whoever else that is an owner of the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Italy, etc., it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this same core group of people that was getting more and more powerful because of what they set up in England, and then the next central bank, which I think was in Italy or France, it wouldn't take a rocket scientist to understand that, they've done this all over the world.
Well, then that would give the empire the votes that it needs in modern-day world in the UN. It gives it the financial edge, which I'm sure the Rothschilds did much to improve during their reign, and in fact they still are. Are they, by any way, are they titularly involved with the Bank of England? The Rothschilds, are they at least entitled?
I haven't seen that, but I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, no. We live in a world in which all kinds of things are possible and probable.
Now, one of the things I opposed to you was the fact that you go back to Cecil Rhodes' comment about bringing the United States back into tow to the crown, and to make us their dumb beasts to fight the wars they couldn't. And I take a look at what's happening now, and I mean, it doesn't matter if one British soldier lost his life. It sounds so bad when you say, well, they only had these many casualties. But to me, it seems like there's a disproportionate representation militarily over there, and it makes me think once again that the United States is being sapped of not only its financial blood, but of its best blood of men and women.
Yes, I would agree with that. I am gravely concerned, and let's just talk for a moment about our president. Our president is related to the current monarch. They are 18th cousins removed, and I believe that's on George Bush's side. And then there is a bloodline between Barbara Bush and Princess Diana's family.
Right, the Stewarts.
The Stewarts, that's right. So there are connections and have been connections with many of our presidents directly back to the British royal family. And in fact, Nixon, of all people, was to be related to the British royal family.
Yes, and I mean, this goes for Gore, and I believe Clinton as well.
I've heard about Clinton, and of course Kerry is related. I mean, it just becomes quite funny.
Well, so then, can we say that with this one world government, that there are many interests who would like to see that put in place?
I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, but at the core, you're looking at really what Rhodes wanted to do. And I mean,
that's right.
They were nasty enough to say in these terms that it's the white man's burden to rule the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so it looks like that they may, in fact, through banking, which has probably got more clout at times than military, but also through the military and also through the World Forum in the UN, Britain might have a good chance to run the table.
Absolutely. And that's what I saw when I did this research, that yes, from a political standpoint, Britain is running the whole international level. There is another aspect that we need to consider with regard to ruling the world, not only through the most votes at the UN or the IMF or the World Bank or the Bank for International Settlements or the Free Trade Areas of the Americas, etc., but at the UN and all these other groups and organizations, when they put together a committee or a commission, let's assume there's 20 people, and they're a composite from all over the world. Some from China, some from Russia, some from Europe, some from Latin America, Central America, the Western Hemisphere, some from Asia, and some from Africa. All right? When you start taking a look at how many people, there might be 3 or 4 of those people come from different parts of the world, and 3 or 4 of the 20 might be, or maybe 5, might be Commonwealth members. All right? So now, what happens in these committees is they rotate presidency, just like you see with the European Union. They rotate presidency every 6 months. So if you start taking a look at the rotation of the presidency, then what that means is that Britain then has the presidency 20 or 30% of the time.
All right. I go back to the Revolution. If we can just jump a couple of centuries here. And sometimes I get the feeling that we really didn't defeat Britain in the American Revolution. It seems to me that perhaps Britain might have said, listen, we're too busy for this. We're fighting insurgents, which should bring a present memory to mind. And, this is too much of a pain. But we can get back what we may have lost or were perceived to have lost by getting involved in the financial workings of the new colonies. And I'm wondering if that was what was at the heart of what Hamilton was trying to do, who struck me more as a Tory than a patriot. Do you have any information about that first bank?
Yeah, that's exactly. Hamilton, from what I recall, came from nothing. He was a very poor man. And he was the one who really was the person who was for aristocracy and for a central bank. That was like his baby, if you will. So, when you look at for example, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was the first Rhodes Scholar in the United States. Well, what is a Rhodes Scholar? We go back to Cecil Rhodes, who, when he died, left his fortune to finding a way to bring America and the rest of the world back under British rule. And the Rhodes Scholarship Program happens to be one of those ways that what they do on a global basis is they look for bright people, but not so much as bright as malleable, that they can then use in such a way to help them obtain their goals.
Also, I would think at the time of the Civil War, and because of the Civil War, Britain was very much involved in that, wasn't she?
Yes, she was.
All right, now where I'm going with this is that I just got done reading 2 books, one called Dark Union, another called The Lincoln Conspiracy. And both of them detail that Britain was a little upset about the Civil War because it was stopping the flow of cotton to them, and it was hurting their economy. And early on in the Civil War, they were thinking about steaming over and getting involved to get this thing finished with. They did not do that. But they did at least effect a clandestine business deal between North and South while the hostilities were going on, in which the North would give the South pork. In return, they would get cotton, which they, in fact, would then send to Britain. And it was good for everybody because of the scarcity. The cotton soared in value. Mm. So all the business people that were involved in that at the time were making a ton, and so was Britain. So, here again, though, I think it behooved them to see what took place, and that was the South, basically states' rights, defeated. And that meant that the possibility of monarchical central government could be instituted. What are your feelings about that?
Oh, I think that's brilliant. I think that's really brilliant. Uh-huh. I can see that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, this is stated in books, of course, that were never promoted for obvious reasons. Now, I'm going to ask you about something else. Now, other people have come on the show, authors. This is basically their bailiwick, but I want to see if you came across anything in this as well. I'll say this much. Booth pretty much it was proven was not the person shot in the Garrett farm just a little south of you. In fact, he did get out, and the handprint of Britain is all over it. In fact, he went to San Francisco, and trust me on this, if I show you the information, you won't think that I'm being wacky about this. He went to the British consulate in San Francisco and effected a passport in an assumed identity of one John Byron Wilkes. Then he went out through, I believe, the British Islands in the Caribbean, off to Ceylon, and in India, where it's pretty well documented that he died in 1883. So what I'm saying is Britain had its hand in that, and so did the Vatican. And here's where I want to go with that. Do you see any relationship, working or otherwise, between the Crown and the Vatican?
I can tell you that the Vatican is its own state, and as such, it has its own position at the United Nations and in all of the UN agencies and commissions. The Vatican literally is all over the place. They are their own nation. Furthermore, they have signed on to the whole United Nations agenda. You know, whenever you go to a UN meeting and you listen to what the Vatican has to say, they're in lockstep with the other countries of the world.
Yeah, well, Eric John Phelps and Charles Wilcox, who have written books about the Vatican and also the Jesuit order, would say that's for a very good reason, that they very much are a network. And the Vatican, like Britain, and like probably all the monarchies of Europe back in the 1860s, wanted to see this successful experiment of a constitutional republic in the United States fail because this was antithetical to the way they wanted to rule, which was feudalism.
Well, when you talk about feudalism, the whole United Nations agenda is feudalistic.
Yes.
And I think for our government, from what I see on the surface, without America, there would be no UN. In other words, the UN is not primarily funded by Britain. Maybe that would be too obvious. It's funded by the U.S. And so I think in some ways America is their lackey, again, which fits everything we've been talking about. But you see, by being their lackey, it makes it look like we are doing, you know, for our own reasons, the things that we're doing, when in fact, you know, all Britain is doing is milking us. I mean, they're, if you will, they're saving their hands from getting dirty. And it is America that is waging these wars all over the world, and it's our money, it's our taxpayer dollars, and it's the back of our burden. And it's all done very nicely through this international organization that the U.S. is the primary funder of, and we are the primary mover and shaker, I mean, with regard to pushing forward the UN agenda.
And also about the financial element between the Crown and the United States. When they got through the income tax, I guess that was, what, in 1913, and then got the Federal Reserve through, they both created the beast, the means, and the supply, the income taxes, to not only keep United States citizens in slavery or in some form of servitude, but to keep a steady flow of money going over to Europe.
Right, right. I mean, everything that is happening today is just a major extension of all these things that have been set up. We are being milked. We are being raped and robbed and pillaged at every turn with regard to our financial position and our own financial stability.
Looking at what's taking place, if we can, in Iraq, maybe Iran, we don't know day to day. But remember, we were talking about Sir Halford Mackinder?
Yes.
All right, the reason why I find it's interesting now, even this relationship between Britain and the United States, is that Mackinder, back at the beginning of the 20th century, claimed that the last empire would take place in the landmass known as World Island, or Earth Island, so sometimes called, and that's what's between Lisbon and Vladivostok. And in order to rule that, and whoever would rule the world, you had to rule the heartland. And what I try to send to you, and I will try again, and that is a map that Mackinder projected the way the world would look, not the globe-like, but what they would call an azimuthal map. And I'll send that to you. But what I mean is, again, here's Mackinder, knighted, part of the Cecil Rhodes crowd, stating this would take place in a century yet to come. So here we are in Iran or Iraq, and I don't think it's so much about the oil. I think it's because they want a positioning on what even Brzezinski called, hearkening back to Mackinder, the grand chessboard.
Ooh.
Now,
absolutely.
Can you see where now we want to be a player in what might be, well, probably going to be the last empire, and whether or not that's a good idea, given the fact that that's not really our playing field, and more or less it's Russia's and China's.
Well, you bring out a couple of things that I have been discussing, or a friend of mine has been discussing with me with regard to Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard. Mm-hmm. And when you take a look at, like, the Ukraine and mm-hmm. the recent election was very, very pivotal to everything that you are talking about. And absolutely, I can see that. When you take a look at the oil capacity of that region, and you take a look at the need to get oil to the ocean, whether it's the Caspian Sea or the various oceans, you have to go through a lot of those same countries that are part of this homeland. So I can see this in a heartbeat, absolutely.
If I can, Joan, just to share this with you, and again, I wanted you to have it. There was also a person who seems to have been probably a prescient and premature neocon. Have you ever heard of an individual by the name of James Burnham?
No.
All right, Burnham's a pretty interesting character and was a heavy anti-communist. But like I always say, if you're so anti-communist, chances are that's your excuse for wanting to see United States empire.
Uh-huh.
But he had said this in one of his writings. He says, it's an axiom of geopolitics that if any one power succeeded in organizing the heartland and its outer barriers, that power would be certain to control the world. In parentheses, Mackinder had written in 1919 that control of the heartland and command of the world island would lead to world dominance. Air power and atomic weapons, Burnham believed, upset the certainty of this axiom. But the facts of geography still gave the Soviet Union an incomparable advantage in the post-war struggle, because geographically, strategically, Eurasia encircles America, overwhelms it. That's quite a different view of the world than we have over here in the Western Hemisphere.
That's very interesting. I have always wondered why we partnered with Russia. MacArthur and Patton both had trouble with that, and Patton especially.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's very interesting that I now see the reason why they did that was for entree to the heartland.
Right, and that's why I say, it's something I didn't develop, but I just came upon it, and it made sense to me. And the further I looked into it to either disprove it or prove it, it was like, now I see that what Iraq represents to the United States and to Great Britain is a platform country from which they can do whatever they want to in that region. But if you remember, have you read The Grand Chessboard at all?
No, I just ordered it, and I'm waiting for it to come.
Well, as listeners have heard on this show a number of times, I've read it, and what I find eerie is the fact that Brzezinski, a number of times in the book, states that the United States should not agitate an axis of Iran, Russia, and China. Now, to me, he's not a crystal ball viewer. He knows what the plan is. And when I see that, it's almost like we're being given a heads up for those who care to see it that way, that this could be brinksmanship on our part. It could be fatal on our part.
Yes, and my friend who brought this to my attention basically said that. He emailed me about a month ago or so, and he said, "Are you paying attention to what's going on in the Ukraine?" And I emailed back, I said, "No." He said, "You'd better." And he called me after I got back from the World Economic Forum, and he said, "Look, this is what's happening. You have Chavez and Venezuela signing agreements saying only Russian country, Chinese countries, companies now. What am I? China or Russia? Which
China.
one? China. And then he said you now have Venezuela, Brazil, Cuba, China, and Russia coming into a new block over oil. And you have Britain, Israel, and America in the other block. And so there is a very, very major move that's coming into fore here. And then, like yesterday, Korea throws the trump card and says, we have nuclear bombs, and we're not going to mess around.
Yeah, I'm trying to. What is the worth of that? I'm trying to figure out. Are we just cycling another element of fear? You know, it's time to bring North Korea out of the box again and shake in front of us.
That's a good question. I am gravely concerned about what Bush is doing. Somebody has called him a megalomaniac. I think he's sick. And, we're treading on eggshells here globally. We have an economy that is in deep debt. The fiat monetary system that runs the world is in dire straits. I wrote an economic newsletter a couple issues ago called Pac-Man Capitalism. And I basically said in that newsletter that in order for the capitalistic system to continue, that it had to constantly develop new products, new markets, and new buyers. And not only did it need new products, markets, and buyers, but it also needed war, because war is a transfer of wealth and an economic stimulus. So, this is what I see. And unfortunately, as we talk about these things with the grand chessboard and we talk about the heartland, it's crystallized. I can see this.
I want to remind everyone that you're listening to a pre-recorded Grassy Knoll show. We have with us Joan Veon. And Joan, once again, please, can you give us some ordering information for not only the 2 newsletters and the books, and where people can also read a host of articles that you've authored?
My website is womensgroup.org. WOMENSGROUP, womensgroup.org. Men, MEN is in the middle of woman, like, whoa, a man, okay? So womensgroup.org. Oh, you like that, huh?
Go ahead.
Well, men say, hey, I feel left out, and I go, hey, wait a minute, you're in the middle of a woman.
Well, when you get done with this, I'm going to remind you of something you said to me about a year ago. It's funny, it's probably been about a year since you were last on. And I'll tell you what it is with man and woman. I'm going to remind you of that. But go ahead and complete the information.
The phone number is 301-371-0541. We have a 2-for-1 special on both Prince Charles and Global Straitjacket. My economic newsletter is $44 a year, and my UN Watch is $45 a year. If you really are really very smart, you will get, for each of those newsletters, all of last year's issues. Okay? Yeah, I know what I'm asking you to do, but you know what? Knowledge is power.
All right, now, do you want me to remind you?
Yes.
Okay. Think back if you can. We were off. We did a pre-record back then, and I said something to you because I had said, I see so many times that women are the tigers when it comes to rebelling against a new world order or one world government, or just in trying to preserve the rights that we have in the United States. They're much more out in front than men. Do you remember what you said to me?
I'm afraid, but remind me.
I won't embarrass you without a doubt. I thought, you called it the way it was, and you said because man has a fatal flaw.
Oh.
Yeah, all right.
That's a pretty good response, because believe me, I would have said something more derogatory today. I have wrestled with why aren't the men stepping up to the plate? And I don't have an answer. I do not have an answer. I don't know if it's the movement created by the feminists. I don't know if they were mothered too much. I don't know if they think this stuff is foolish, which means they're immature emotionally. I don't know. but maybe it's because the woman is the nurturer, and Dad goes and he. I mean, excuse me, I'm really sorry to have to say this, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, but most men just, they're absent fathers. They're there physically, but they're absent emotionally. And so with that in mind, they're not stepping up to the plate for all the things that matter because, to be very honest, they're just having a rough time putting food on the table.
All right. And I thank you for being that honest with us. And, of course, I asked for that, so thank you for responding as frankly as you did. I want to ask you about something. You don't speak much about it as far as I know, but are we going to have an American Union? How close are we? Is it off the drafting table or what?
I mean, American Union meaning?
What would we call it? The 34 or 35 country bloc that is?
Oh, you mean the free trade areas of the Americas? Well, I tell you, I covered the second and the third meeting of the free trade areas of the Americas, and I know they have a fourth or fifth. They have a fifth meeting coming up this year. I'm not sure I'll be able to get to that. Since I have to work for a living and can't do everything I'd like to do. The bottom line is this. I have a document on my website. People need to go to it. It's called Words into Deeds. Very, very powerful document. Can't get it anymore through the State Department. Early on when I talked about it, the State Department refused to give it out anymore. So the only place you can get it is on my website. You go to that document because it's 10 years old, all right? And back then it was showing how they were already integrating all of the transportation laws, all of the housing laws, all of the financial laws, all of the legal laws, etc., over the last 10 years throughout the whole hemisphere. I did an interview with James Knotson, just as a parallel to what I want to say, from the White House Environmental Department and our council. And I talked to him about the law of the sea treaty. And he said, well, it's a done deal. He said, we've already implemented almost everything. Yep. He said, so all Congress has to do is make it legal. Well, that's going to be the same thing with the free trade areas of the Americas. Right now, you have Texas, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, Costa Rica, I forget somewhere else, all vying for the Secretariat of the Free Trade Areas of the Americas. Now, if it ain't all put together, you don't need a Secretariat. Mm-hmm. So I could never understand way back 15, 18 years ago why my congresswoman, who is a liberal left Republican, wanted 2 languages in America. Yep. They have effectively made America bilingual by all of their policies and by allowing all the kinds of immigration into America that they have.
Well, one of the I don't believe that your congressperson necessarily knows that this is going on, but is being...
Oh, she does. She's a major mover and shaker on the international level.
Well, then here's the point also, and that's one of the things that has to happen to kneecap the United States is they have to become de-Americanized.
Yes.
And one of the ways you can do that is to have what you might call an inordinate amount of immigration, in this case mostly illegal, to change the complexion, or at least have a rationale to change things like let's get bilingual. But every single one of these moves de-Americanizes the United States.
Right.
Now, one thing about the American Union, Galen Ross had done a video called American Union 2005, mm-hmm. and in it you see a number of people, among them Madeleine Albright, Cheney, Gergen, of course David Rockefeller, in all these meetings carried by C-SPAN, all popping off about how we were going to have the American Union in 2005. Now, clearly something didn't happen. Now, let me run you by this. I said that to Bob Chapman, who's a financial analyst.
Yes.
And I said, what's with the AU? And he wrote back and he said, forget about it. It's dead right now. He said, because what's happened is so many South America and Central American nations are Marxist. They get what's going on and they want no part of it. So in a way, kind of like for us, it's the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Hmm. So I think about this with Chavez especially, kind of twiddling his nose at the global or the unionizing effort here in the Western Hemisphere. So do you believe it could be that there's been a snag in plans for the AU because of what's taking place in Central and Southern America?
I would have to agree with everything you have said. It wasn't like I gave it thought, but you're right, especially because of the new oil sphere that I see with China and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And, and speaking of China and Russia, China has also signed huge mega deals with Iran for the next 10 years. So, I mean, America goes into Iran and there's going to be, hell to pay.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the situation with Chavez, reportedly, when he had a coup a couple of years ago that was instigated by us, the people put him back in office. And I'm not defending Marxists, but the thing is, if he's willing to nationalize their oil, that means the globalists can't get their hands on it, especially the profits. So why wouldn't they back a guy like that? And so we have to demonize him because probably he's doing the best thing for the Venezuelan people. Certainly we aren't.
Well, we've certainly raped, robbed, and pillaged enough that even a good Marxist would be able to see that.
Yeah, indeed. And don't you find it interesting, too, that some of these land masses that have been, I don't know, somewhat kept in a third world situation or quasi-third world situation.
Perpetual.
Yeah, and they have minerals, gold, diamonds. I mean, you look at sub-Saharan Africa. You look at a great deal of South America and Southeast Asia. And I find it interesting, by the way, and I know we're coming up to the close of the show, but I want to ask you about this. It's funny, in the Neocon manifesto that you can find on the newamericancentury.org, in which they write Rebuilding America's Defenses, they claim they want, this goes back to 2000, they wanted a permanent presence in Southwest Asia and Southeast Asia. And I'm thinking, how are you going to do that in Southeast Asia? And I'm not going anywhere with this, but all of a sudden we have the tsunami. And we're there.
Well, let me say with regard to the tsunami, I have a friend in New Zealand, and I have written a new report. And he ended up writing me and sending me a picture of a friend of his who was a test pilot, a British test pilot, who worked on the British controlled. The British were testing tsunami bombs back in 1970 out of a top secret British controlled U.S. Air Force base in the Indian Ocean called Diego Garcia.
Right.
And so, I'm going to have to send you my report on the reform of the United Nations. You will be able to understand that we're on the same page.
Well, I got some information, and it was on a website that belongs to a United Nations group. And Harry, who couldn't be with us today because he has other exigencies to take care of, and he killed me for saying this, but on this website, they talk about back in 1977, not only don't weaponize space, but they're saying also desist in using such measures as tsunami causing explosions or detonations. So here, if this is legitimate, this was already known about as far back as the late 70s. And I would assume that this somewhat coincides with what you're telling me about what that British test pilot was talking about.
Yeah. And so it's too bad we're running out of time. We need to do another radio show on the reform of the United Nations because the tsunami, in my opinion, was a dress rehearsal for a new agenda that the United Nations wants to put forth in September.